He promised to love her in sickness and in health. But the moment cancer entered her life, he disappeared. Not only did he abandon her, he stole the $300,000 meant to keep her alive and ran off with his mistress. Left alone, broke, and fighting for her life, she nearly gave up, until a stranger knocked on her door and changed everything. But while she was slowly healing, karma was already catching up with the man who betrayed her. Hello, fam. Welcome to True Love Stories, where we share interesting and intriguing stories. Please do well to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do not forget to like and share with your loved ones. Now let's dive into the story. The church on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta was filled with music, laughter, and the warm glow of celebration. Family members fanned themselves with decorated church programs while sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows, scattering colors across the polished wooden floor. At the altar stood Marcus Carter, tall, handsome, and sharply dressed in a fitted black tuxedo. He wore the confident smile that had charmed so many people over the years. Friends often described Marcus as the kind of man who could talk his way into any room and make everyone believe he belonged there. But what many people didn't realize was that Marcus loved comfort, excitement, and easy living far more than he valued responsibility. Still, on that day, no one questioned the sincerity of the moment. Not even the bride walking slowly down the aisle toward him. Nia Carter, then Nia Brooks, looked radiant in a simple ivory gown that hugged her figure and flowed gently behind her as she walked. Her natural curls were styled softly around her face, and her smile was bright with hope. At 28 years old, Nia believed she had found the partner she would build a life with. She worked as a community youth coordinator, spending her days mentoring teenagers and organizing after-school programs in neighborhoods that needed support. Nia had always been known as someone with a warm heart, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, checked on friends when they were struggling, and believed strongly in building a family rooted in love and loyalty. When she met Marcus 3 years earlier at a mutual friend's birthday party, she had been swept away by his charm, his ambition, and the confidence with which he talked about their future together. Marcus had told her he wanted the same things she did: a home, a family, stability, and success. He spoke about starting a business one day, traveling together, and giving their future children opportunities they had never had growing up. To Nia, Marcus felt like a dream finally becoming real. When he proposed on a warm summer evening by the Chattahoochee River, kneeling with a ring that sparkled in the fading sunlight, she didn't hesitate for even a second before saying yes. Their families celebrated the engagement with excitement. Nia's late mother had always told her that love should feel safe, and Marcus seemed to offer exactly that. During the wedding ceremony, the pastor spoke warmly about commitment, sacrifice, and partnership. Marriage, he said, looking at both of them, is not just about the good days. It's about standing together through the storms. Nia squeezed Marcus's hands gently as they repeated their vows. Her voice trembled with emotion as she promised to love him in sickness and in health, for better or worse, for the rest of their lives. Marcus repeated the same vows with practiced confidence, his tone steady and smooth. The congregation applauded when they were pronounced husband and wife, and the newly married couple walked down the aisle surrounded by cheers, applause, and thrown flower petals. Photographers captured smiling pictures that would later sit framed on their living room shelves. To everyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple beginning a beautiful life together. The first year of marriage seemed to support that illusion. Marcus worked in sales for a regional electronics distributor and often talked about climbing the corporate ladder. Nia continued her work with community youth programs and loved every minute of it. They rented a comfortable apartment in Midtown Atlanta, a place with large windows overlooking busy streets and coffee shops below. Weekends were spent exploring new restaurants, attending family gatherings, or relaxing at home with music playing softly in the background. Marcus enjoyed the lifestyle their combined incomes allowed. Nice clothes, nights out with friends, and the admiration that came with appearing successful. Nia, on the other hand, was more focused on building a stable future. She carefully saved money, planned budgets, and often talked about eventually buying a house and starting a family. But Marcus began to grow restless in ways Nia couldn't see. Responsibility bored him. Routine irritated him. He enjoyed the excitement of attention, admiration, and easy pleasure. While Nia was thinking about long-term plans and stability, Marcus was already feeling trapped by the idea of settling into a life that required patience and sacrifice. Still, he hid those feelings well. Around Nia, he played the role of the supportive husband, smiling, encouraging, and affectionate enough to keep her doubts away. 2 years into their marriage, the first signs of trouble appeared, though not in the way either of them expected. Nia started feeling constantly exhausted. At first, she blamed the long hours she spent working with the youth programs. Then came the headaches, the unexplained bruises, and the strange pain that seemed to linger no matter how much she rested. Marcus barely noticed at first. When she mentioned feeling unwell, he brushed it off casually, suggesting she take vitamins or sleep more. But the symptoms continued to worsen, and eventually Nia scheduled a series of medical tests at Mercy Medical Center. The diagnosis arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a small hospital office that suddenly felt far too cold and silent. The doctor sat across from them, his expression serious but compassionate. "Nia," he began gently, "the tests show that you have stage 2 lymphoma." For a moment, Nia couldn't process the words. Cancer was something she had always associated with distant tragedies, stories about strangers or distant relatives, not something that could suddenly appear in her own life. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at Marcus, hoping for reassurance, hoping he would squeeze her hand and tell her they would face this together. Instead, Marcus sat stiffly in his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor as if he were calculating something rather than absorbing the emotional weight of the news. "I'm going to fight this," Nia said softly after a moment, trying to sound stronger than she felt. The doctor explained the treatment plan: chemotherapy sessions, medication, regular monitoring, and the financial costs that often came with long-term care. Nia listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. Marcus, however, became increasingly quiet. The conversation about treatments and medical bills seemed to make him uncomfortable. By the time they left the hospital, the excitement and laughter that once defined their marriage felt strangely distant. What Marcus never admitted to Nia was the thought that had begun forming in his mind the moment the doctor mentioned chemotherapy. He hadn't signed up for this. In the weeks that followed, Nia focused on preparing for treatment. She researched options, scheduled appointments, and spoke with financial advisors about managing the costs. Thankfully, there was one source of security she believed would help her through the fight. Before her mother passed away several years earlier, she had quietly built a medical savings fund for Nia in case life ever brought unexpected hardship. That account had slowly grown over time through investments and insurance payouts. By the time Nia accessed it after her diagnosis, the fund held nearly $300,000. To Nia, it represented protection. Her mother's love reaching forward through time to protect her daughter during the hardest moment of her life. She trusted that the money would allow her to focus on healing instead of worrying about how she would afford treatment. While Nia began the difficult journey of chemotherapy and recovery, Marcus's attitude slowly shifted. At first, he attended a few hospital visits, but he always seemed distracted, checking his phone or stepping outside to take calls. Soon he began missing appointments entirely, claiming he had work meetings or urgent sales trips. He started staying out late more often, coming home with vague explanations and the smell of unfamiliar perfume lingering on his clothes. Nia tried to ignore the signs. She told herself that Marcus was simply stressed, that the situation was difficult for him too. After all, they were newly married and facing something terrifying. She believed love meant giving him patience. But behind the scenes, Marcus was already drifting far away from the life they had promised each other. And somewhere across the city, a woman named Tasha Reynolds was about to become part of a plan that would destroy everything Nia believed about the man she married. Cancer had a way of changing the rhythm of a person's life. For Nia Carter, The days that once felt full and purposeful slowly began revolving around hospital visits, treatment schedules, medication alarms, and moments of quiet exhaustion. The strong, energetic woman who once spent long hours mentoring teenagers now struggled to climb the stairs to her apartment without pausing to catch her breath. Chemotherapy had begun taking its toll. Some mornings she woke up feeling hopeful and determined, but others felt like a heavy fog of nausea, weakness, and fear. Yet even through the hardest days, Nia refused to give up. She believed deeply that she would beat the illness. Her mother had always taught her that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about standing back up every time life knocked you down. The doctors at Mercy Medical Center were optimistic about her chances. Stage 2 lymphoma was serious, but it was also treatable if she remained consistent with her therapy. Each treatment session was carefully scheduled weeks in advance, and the costs were substantial. Thankfully, Nia wasn't facing the terrifying financial burden that many patients struggled with. The $300,000 medical fund her mother left behind gave her peace of mind. She kept the account organized carefully, documenting every payment and medical expense, so the money would last throughout the entire treatment process. To Nia, that fund wasn't just money. It was a lifeline created out of her mother's love. Marcus knew about the account too. At first, he pretended not to care much about it. When Nia mentioned the savings one evening while reviewing her treatment plan, Marcus simply nodded and said, "Well, at least you're covered." But the number had stayed in his mind ever since. $300,000. It was more money than Marcus had ever seen in one place in his life. The idea of it began creeping into his thoughts more often than he wanted to admit. At work, he found himself daydreaming about what that kind of money could do: luxury vacations, new cars, expensive clothes, freedom from the 9-to-5 job he secretly hated. The longer Nia's illness continued, the more Marcus began viewing her situation not as something tragic, but as something inconvenient that was standing between him and the kind of life he felt he deserved. And by that time, Marcus had already started spending more time with someone else. Tasha Reynolds was everything Nia wasn't. She was bold, carefree, and reckless in a way Marcus found thrilling. He met her one night at a downtown Atlanta lounge while he was out drinking with coworkers. Tasha had a sharp smile, confident attitude, and the kind of beauty that turned heads when she walked into a room. She didn't ask questions about responsibility or commitment. She didn't talk about the future or sacrifice. Instead, she talked about traveling, parties, expensive shopping, and living life on her own terms. To Marcus, she felt like an escape. Their conversations quickly turned into late-night meetings, secret hotel visits, and whispered plans about leaving Atlanta behind. Tasha knew Marcus was married, but she didn't care. In fact, the drama of it seemed to excite her. One night, as they sat together in a dimly lit bar, Marcus finally told her about the money. $300,000? Tasha repeated, her eyebrows lifting with interest. Marcus nodded slowly, sipping his drink. It's sitting there for her medical treatments. Tasha leaned closer, lowering her voice. And you're just going to let it sit there? Marcus didn't answer immediately, but the silence between them spoke louder than words. Over the following weeks, the idea grew into a plan. At home, Nia was becoming weaker from the treatments. Some nights she fell asleep on the couch early, completely drained from the day's hospital visit. Marcus watched her quietly from across the room, his mind racing with calculations. He had already memorized the way she logged into her online banking account. He had seen her type the passwords enough times to know exactly how to access the fund. All he needed was the right moment. That moment came on a quiet Thursday night. Nia had returned home from one of the most difficult chemotherapy sessions yet. Her body ached, and she could barely keep her eyes open. Marcus pretended to be attentive, helping her settle onto the couch with a blanket and bringing her a glass of water. She smiled weakly at him, grateful for the small gesture. "Thank you," she murmured. "Get some rest," Marcus replied softly. Within minutes, Nia had fallen asleep. The apartment grew silent except for the faint hum of traffic outside the window. Marcus sat in the living room staring at his phone, his heart beating faster with every passing second. The moment had arrived. Slowly, he stood and walked toward the dining table where Nia's laptop rested. For a brief moment, a flicker of hesitation passed through him. This was his wife, the woman who trusted him completely, the woman who had promised to build a life with him. But then another thought pushed the guilt aside. She might not even survive this anyway. Marcus opened the laptop. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The banking website loaded, and just as he remembered, the login page appeared. He typed the username, then the password he had watched her enter so many times. The screen refreshed. There it was. Balance: $300,417.86. Marcus felt a rush of adrenaline. His breathing grew heavier as he created a new transfer request, moving the entire amount into a separate account he had secretly opened weeks earlier. The numbers blinked on the screen for a few seconds while the transaction processed. Then the confirmation message appeared. Transfer successful. $300,000. Gone. Marcus leaned back in the chair, his heart pounding with excitement. Instead of guilt, he felt a strange sense of victory. In his mind, this wasn't betrayal, it was escape. The next morning, Marcus packed a suitcase before sunrise. He moved quietly through the apartment while Nia slept in the bedroom, unaware that her entire world was about to collapse. He paused briefly near the doorway, glancing back at the life he was leaving behind. For a second, he almost reconsidered. But then his phone buzzed. A message from Tasha appeared on the screen. "Did you get it?" Marcus smirked and typed back. "Yeah, we're free." He left the apartment without another word. Hours later, when Nia woke up, the apartment felt strangely empty. Marcus's side of the closet was cleared out. His suitcase was gone. At first she assumed he had left early for work or maybe traveled for a meeting. Confused, she reached for her phone. That was when she saw his message. "I can't do this anymore. I didn't sign up to watch you die. I'm leaving. Don't try to find me." Her heart dropped into her stomach as the words blurred through tears. Still shaking, she rushed to her laptop and logged into her bank account, hoping desperately that there had been some mistake. The screen loaded. Her eyes scanned the balance. $142.63. For a moment, Nia couldn't breathe. Her hands began trembling violently as the truth crashed over her like a wave. Marcus hadn't just abandoned her. He had stolen the $300,000 meant to save her life. The room spun around her as she slowly slid down to the floor, the cold tiles pressing against her skin. A deep, broken sob escaped her chest, echoing through the empty apartment. In the space of a single night, Nia Carter had lost her husband, her security, and the money that was supposed to help her survive cancer. And the man she once loved was already on his way out of the city, celebrating his freedom with another woman. The silence in the apartment felt heavier than anything Nia had ever experienced. After Marcus left, time seemed to lose its meaning. Morning light would creep through the curtains, fade into afternoon, and then disappear into night again. But to Nia it all felt like one long, painful blur. The apartment that once held laughter, music, and quiet evenings with her husband now felt hollow and unfamiliar. Everywhere she looked, memories haunted her. Marcus's favorite chair still sat near the window. A framed wedding photo rested on the shelf beside the television. Two smiling faces stared back at her from that picture. Two people who once believed they would face life together. Now she was alone. Completely alone. For 3 days, Nia barely left the couch. Her body was already weak from chemotherapy, but the emotional blow Marcus had delivered made everything worse. She couldn't bring herself to eat more than a few bites of food. Even drinking water felt like a chore. Her phone rang repeatedly throughout the day, the sound echoing through the quiet apartment. The hospital. Nurses. Appointment reminders. She ignored every call. What was the point? Without the money, she had no way to continue treatment. The fund her mother had left for her, $300,000 carefully saved to protect her daughter, was gone. Stolen by the man who had promised to love and protect her. Sometimes Nia sat staring at the wall for hours, replaying memories in her mind, trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. She remembered the night Marcus proposed by the river, the way he had looked at her during their wedding vows, the quiet evenings when they talked about buying a house and starting a family. Had all of it been a lie? Tears streamed down her face as that question echoed in her mind again and again. On the fourth day, Nia finally gathered the strength to check her phone messages. There were dozens of missed calls from Mercy Medical Center. One voicemail in particular caught her attention. It was from one of the oncologists involved in her treatment team, Dr. Daniel Okoye. His voice on the message was calm but concerned. "Nia, this is Dr. Okoye from Mercy Medical Center. You missed your chemotherapy session yesterday, and we haven't been able to reach you. Please call us back as soon as you can. Your treatment schedule is very important." Nia stared at the phone after the message ended. Her chest tightened painfully. Treatment schedule. Appointments. Hope. All of it felt meaningless now. What kind of future could she possibly have after everything that had happened? Even if she somehow continued treatment, the man she had loved and trusted had abandoned her during the darkest moment of her life. The betrayal cut deeper than the illness itself. That evening, rain began falling outside the apartment windows, tapping softly against the glass. The gray sky mirrored the heaviness in Nia's heart. She slowly stood from the couch and walked into the kitchen, her legs trembling slightly with each step. She opened the cabinet above the sink. Inside sat a bottle of strong prescription pain medication given to her after her first chemotherapy treatment. She picked it up slowly, staring at the small white pills inside the container. A thought crept quietly into her mind. Maybe this pain could finally stop. The idea frightened her at first. Nia had always been a fighter. She had spent years encouraging struggling teenagers to believe in themselves and never give up no matter how hard life became. But now she felt like a completely different person, broken, exhausted, and overwhelmed by a loneliness she had never imagined possible. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she turned the bottle slowly in her hands. "No more pain," she whispered softly to herself. Her fingers began to twist the cap open. Just as the lid loosened, a loud knock suddenly echoed through the apartment. Nia froze. Another knock followed, firm but not aggressive. "Ms. Carter?" A male voice called from the other side of the door. "It's Dr. Okoye from Mercy Medical Center." Nia's heart jumped in surprise. She quickly wiped her face, still holding the pill bottle in one hand. For a moment she considered pretending she wasn't home. But the voice spoke again, this time more gently. "Nia, we've been worried about you. You missed your treatment, and we haven't heard from you." Slowly, she walked toward the door. When she opened it, she found a tall man standing in the hallway holding a small folder under his arm. Dr. Daniel Okoye looked exactly as she remembered him from the hospital. Calm, professional, and quietly observant. In his late 30s, he carried himself with a steady confidence that made many patients feel at ease. His deep brown eyes studied her face carefully, immediately noticing the tear stains and the exhaustion written across her features. But what caught his attention most was the pill bottle still in her trembling hand. His expression shifted instantly. Without raising his voice or showing panic, Daniel gently stepped inside the apartment. "Nia," he said softly. Before she could react, he carefully took the bottle from her hand and set it on the kitchen counter. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Nia's composure shattered. The pain she had been holding inside finally burst out all at once. Her shoulders shook as she began sobbing uncontrollably. Daniel didn't interrupt her or try to rush the moment. Instead, he guided her slowly to the couch and sat beside her, allowing her the space to release everything she had been carrying. Through broken breaths, Nia told him the entire story. Marcus leaving, the stolen $300,000, the message he had sent, the empty bank account. By the time she finished speaking, her voice had become hoarse from crying. Daniel sat quietly for a moment, absorbing everything she had said. His jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his tone calm when he finally spoke. "Nia," he said gently, "what your husband did to you is cruel. But it does not mean your life is over. She shook her head weakly. I can't afford treatment anymore. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. You don't need to worry about that tonight. But I'm serious, he said firmly but kindly. Your health is what matters right now. The hospital has resources for situations like this. Financial assistance programs, grants, patient support funds. We will figure something out. The certainty in his voice surprised her. For the first time in days, Nia felt something she thought had completely disappeared. A small spark of hope. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now. You are not alone in this fight, he said. The words hung in the quiet room like a lifeline. And in that moment, standing at the very edge of despair, Nia Carter realized that a stranger had just stepped into her life at exactly the moment she needed someone the most. That night changed everything. After Nia's breakdown in the living room, Dr. Daniel Okoye stayed longer than he originally planned. At first, he had only intended to check on a patient who had suddenly stopped attending her treatments. But once he saw the state Nia was in and heard the story of what had happened, leaving didn't feel right. He made her a cup of tea in the small kitchen while she sat quietly on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. The rain outside continued to fall steadily against the windows, creating a soft rhythm in the background. For the first time since Marcus had left, Nia didn't feel completely alone. Daniel sat across from her in the armchair, his posture relaxed but attentive. Years of working with cancer patients had taught him something important. Sometimes people didn't need complicated advice. Sometimes they just needed someone who was willing to sit with them in their pain. I should have seen it coming, Nia murmured after a while, staring down at her hands. Daniel shook his head gently. Betrayal always feels obvious after it happens. But when you love someone, you trust them. That's not weakness. Nia's eyes filled with tears again, though this time they weren't the desperate tears from earlier. They were quieter. He took everything, she whispered. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Money can be replaced, he said calmly. Your life can't. She looked up at him, unsure whether to believe that. The following weeks became the beginning of an unexpected transformation. True to his word, Dr. Okoye worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He contacted hospital administrators, financial counselors, and several nonprofit organizations that specialized in helping cancer patients who had lost financial support. He explained Nia's situation carefully. How her husband had stolen the $300,000 medical fund, how she had been abandoned in the middle of treatment. The response surprised even him. Within days, Mercy Medical Center approved her for emergency treatment coverage through a charitable care program. A National Cancer Support Foundation agreed to help cover medication costs, and a patient housing program offered Nia a small furnished apartment near the hospital so she wouldn't have to worry about commuting while she was weak from chemotherapy. When Daniel told her the news, Nia stared at him in disbelief. All of this is really possible? She asked. Yes, Daniel said simply. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they carried gratitude rather than despair. You saved my life, she whispered. Daniel shook his head slightly. No, you're the one doing the hard work. With the financial burden temporarily lifted, Nia resumed her treatments. The chemotherapy sessions were still brutal. Some days she woke up nauseated and dizzy, barely able to keep food down. Other days her entire body ached so badly she struggled just to stand. But she kept going, and almost every week, Daniel stopped by to check on her. At first their conversations were strictly medical. He would review her test results, adjust medications, and explain how her body was responding to treatment. But slowly, their discussions began drifting into more personal territory. One afternoon after a treatment session, Nia sat outside in the hospital garden, trying to enjoy the warm sunlight. Daniel happened to pass by and stopped when he noticed her sitting alone. How are you feeling today? He asked. Like my bones ran a marathon, she said with a tired smile. Daniel chuckled softly and sat on the bench beside her. For a few minutes they simply enjoyed the quiet breeze moving through the trees. Then Nia glanced at him curiously. She said, You're the only doctor I've met who actually sits down and talks with patients like this. Daniel shrugged slightly. My mother had cancer when I was in medical school, he said. Watching her go through treatment taught me something important. What's that? That medicine isn't just about drugs and procedures. People heal better when they feel like someone actually cares whether they live. Nia looked at him differently after that conversation. She began noticing the small things about him. The patience in the way he explained complicated medical information, the calm confidence he carried even during stressful hospital days, and the kindness that seemed to guide every decision he made. Daniel noticed things about her too. Despite the exhaustion of chemotherapy, Nia remained incredibly compassionate toward others. She often comforted fellow patients in the waiting room, encouraging them before their treatments began. Even when she was struggling herself, she found ways to lift the spirits of people around her. It reminded Daniel why he had chosen this profession in the first place. Months passed. Slowly, the treatments began working. Follow-up scans showed the tumors shrinking. Her blood work improved steadily. Though the journey was still far from over, the doctors were encouraged by her progress. Nia also began to change emotionally. The crushing heartbreak Marcus left behind slowly started losing its grip on her life. Instead of spending nights crying in her apartment, she now filled her days with recovery, hospital visits, and quiet moments of conversation with the people who supported her. Especially Daniel. Their friendship grew naturally, without pressure or expectation. Sometimes he brought her books to read during long treatment sessions. Other times they simply talked about music, childhood memories, or the funny things patients said in the hospital waiting room. One evening after a particularly difficult treatment session, Daniel walked her back to her patient apartment building. As they reached the entrance, Nia turned to him. I don't think I ever properly thanked you, she said. You've thanked me plenty of times. No, she said gently. Not for this. She gestured toward the building, the hospital across the street, and the quiet life she was slowly rebuilding. You didn't just help me with treatment, she continued. You gave me something I thought I had lost. Daniel looked at her curiously. What's that? Nia smiled softly. Hope. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel smiled back, a quiet warmth in his eyes. Hold on to it, he said. You're going to need it for the next few rounds of chemo. Nia laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from deep inside. And in that moment, neither of them realized that what had started as a doctor helping a struggling patient was slowly becoming something much deeper. Because sometimes, the people who walk into your life as strangers are the very ones who end up saving it. While Nia was slowly rebuilding her life in Atlanta, far away in another part of the country, Marcus Carter was living the kind of life he had always imagined for himself. At least, that's what he thought. The morning after he emptied Nia's medical account, Marcus met Tasha Reynolds at the airport with a smug smile on his face and a backpack slung over his shoulder. Tasha arrived wearing oversized sunglasses, a tight designer outfit, and the confident grin of someone who believed she had just won the lottery. Well, she asked immediately. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the balance in the new account. $300,000. Tasha's eyes widened. Oh, you actually did it, she said with a low whistle. Marcus smirked proudly. Told you I would. That moment felt like the beginning of freedom to them both. With that kind of money, they believed they could disappear, travel wherever they wanted, and live without worrying about responsibilities. Their first stop was Miami. For the first few weeks, life felt like one long party. They checked into an expensive beachfront hotel with a panoramic view of the ocean. Every morning they woke up to sunlight reflecting across the water, and every night they went out to clubs, restaurants, and bars where Marcus spent money like it would never run out. Designer clothes, luxury dinners, private boat rides. Tasha especially loved shopping. She dragged Marcus through high-end boutiques along Collins Avenue, emerging with bags full of expensive dresses, shoes, jewelry, and perfumes. You've got to spend money to enjoy life, she would say with a playful laugh. Marcus didn't argue. For once, he felt like the successful man he had always pretended to be. No job stress. No sick wife. No responsibilities. Just freedom. From Miami, they flew to Cancun, booking a luxury resort that catered to wealthy tourists. Their hotel suite overlooked white sand beaches and turquoise water. They spent their days lounging by the pool, drinking cocktails, and posting carefully edited photos on social media that made their lives look glamorous. But behind the scenes, something else was slowly growing between them. Greed. The first serious argument happened about 2 months into their trip. Marcus was sitting on the balcony one evening, scrolling through the account balance on his phone. After all their spending, the total had already dropped significantly. $184,000 remaining. Tasha stepped outside carrying 2 glasses of wine. "We should start planning Europe next," she said casually. "Paris, maybe Rome." Marcus frowned slightly. "We might need to slow down a little." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Slow down." He turned the phone toward her. "We've already spent over 100,000. Tasha rolled her eyes and took a sip of wine. "You're acting like the money's running out tomorrow." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That's not the point." Tasha crossed her arms. "Then what is the point?" Marcus hesitated before speaking. "You remember what we agreed when this started," he said slowly. "I get a larger share of the money." Her expression darkened instantly. "Excuse me," she said sharply. Marcus shrugged. "I'm the one who actually took the risk." Tasha stared at him in disbelief. "You mean stealing from your sick wife?" she snapped. Marcus looked irritated. "Yeah, that." Tasha set her wine glass down harder than necessary. "We agreed on half," she said firmly. Marcus shook his head. "No, you assumed half." The tension between them thickened instantly. For weeks they had been pretending to be partners in a glamorous adventure. But the reality was much uglier. Neither of them trusted the other. The argument ended that night without resolution, but it planted something dangerous between them. After that, every purchase, every conversation about travel plans, every glance at the bank account became a potential fight waiting to explode. By the 3rd month, the cracks were impossible to ignore. They had moved to another hotel in Los Angeles, hoping a change of scenery would improve things. Instead, the tension followed them everywhere. One night, after a long day of arguing about money, Marcus returned to the hotel room visibly irritated. Tasha was sitting on the bed counting a stack of cash she had withdrawn earlier. "How much did you take?" Marcus asked immediately. She didn't look up. "Enough." Marcus walked closer. "You didn't answer my question." Tasha shrugged. "Maybe I'm making sure I have what I'm owed." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You're not owed anything." That sentence ignited the explosion that had been building for weeks. Tasha stood up quickly, anger flashing across her face. "You wouldn't even have this money if it wasn't for me encouraging you," she shouted. Marcus laughed bitterly. "Encouraging? Please. You just saw dollar signs. And you're any better?" she snapped. The argument escalated rapidly. Voices grew louder, insults sharper. "You're greedy," Marcus shouted. "You're a coward who stole from a dying woman." Tasha fired back. Marcus stepped closer, his voice rising. "She's probably dead by now anyway." The words had barely left his mouth when Tasha's temper finally snapped. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy glass lamp sitting on the nightstand beside the bed. Marcus barely had time to react. The lamp swung through the air and struck the side of his head with a sickening crack. For a moment, the room went completely silent. Marcus collapsed instantly. His body hit the floor with a dull thud. Blood slowly spread across the carpet as he lay motionless. Tasha froze, staring at him in horror. "Oh my God! Marcus!" He didn't move. Panic flooded through her chest. Her mind raced as she looked around the room, trying to decide what to do. Instead of calling for help, she did the first thing that came to mind. She grabbed the backpack containing the remaining cash and ran. Within minutes, she had left the hotel and jumped into a taxi heading toward the airport. Her plan was simple: disappear before anyone realized what had happened. But she had overlooked one important detail. The entire hallway outside their hotel room was covered with security cameras. When hotel staff discovered Marcus unconscious in the room and reviewed the footage, the story became painfully clear. By the time Tasha arrived at the airport, police officers were already waiting for her at the terminal. She was arrested before she even reached the boarding gate. Marcus was rushed to a nearby hospital. Doctors managed to stop the bleeding in his brain, but the damage had already been done. The injury left him in a deep coma, completely unresponsive. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Marcus Carter, the man who had run away to avoid caring for a sick wife, was now lying in a hospital bed, completely dependent on machines and nurses to survive. And hundreds of miles away in Atlanta, the woman he betrayed was slowly becoming stronger every single day. Nearly a year had passed since the night Nia Carter stood in her kitchen holding a bottle of pills and wondering if life was still worth fighting for. Now she stood in a completely different place. The warm Atlanta sun touched her face as she stepped out of Mercy Medical Center, breathing in the fresh afternoon air. The world around her seemed brighter than she remembered. The blue sky stretched endlessly above, and the soft rustling of leaves in the hospital courtyard trees felt almost musical. For the first time in a long while, Nia felt strong. Her reflection in the hospital window showed a woman who had changed. The chemotherapy had taken her hair months earlier, but it had begun to grow back in soft, thick curls that framed her face. Her body was still recovering, but the constant weakness that once weighed her down had slowly faded. Inside the hospital, just minutes earlier, she had heard the words she once feared she would never hear. "Your scans are clear, Nia. You're cancer-free." The doctor who said those words was standing beside her now. Dr. Daniel Okoye leaned casually against the railing near the hospital steps, watching her quietly as she took in the moment. Over the past year, he had witnessed every stage of her journey: the fear, the pain, the exhaustion, and the determination that pushed her forward when things felt impossible. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he asked gently. Nia laughed softly, almost in disbelief. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me they made a mistake," she admitted. Daniel shook his head with a small smile. "No mistakes this time." For a moment, Nia simply stood there, letting the words settle deep in her heart. Cancer-free. The phrase felt surreal. Her mind drifted back through the past year. The endless hospital visits, the long chemotherapy sessions, the nights when she thought her body couldn't take another round of treatment. Through all of it, Daniel had remained a constant presence in her life. At first, he had simply been her doctor. But somewhere along the way, things had begun to change. It happened gradually, almost quietly. Late conversations after appointments. Walks through the hospital garden when she needed fresh air. Small gestures like Daniel bringing her soup when she couldn't eat or leaving encouraging notes in her patient file before difficult treatments. Through every step of her recovery, he never rushed her or pushed her to move faster than she was ready for. Instead, he simply stayed. And sometimes that meant more than anything else. As they walked through the courtyard together, Nia glanced at him thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "when you first knocked on my door that night, I thought you were just another doctor checking on a missed appointment." Daniel chuckled. "Technically, I was. But you stayed." He looked down briefly, as if choosing his words carefully. "I stayed because I saw someone who still had a lot of life left in her," he said. Nia stopped walking. For a moment, she simply looked at him, emotion rising in her chest. "You didn't just save my life medically," she said quietly. "You saved me from giving up." Daniel's expression softened. "You saved yourself, Nia," he replied. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed softly in her purse. She pulled it out and glanced at the notification. It was a news article. A headline caught her attention immediately. "Woman arrested after assault leaves man in permanent coma." Her stomach tightened as she opened the article. The story described a violent incident months earlier involving a couple traveling through Los Angeles. During an argument over stolen money, a woman had struck a man with a heavy object, leaving him with severe brain damage. The woman had been arrested at the airport shortly afterward. The article mentioned their names: Marcus Carter, Tasha Reynolds. Nia stared at the screen silently. Daniel noticed the sudden shift in her expression. "What is it?" he asked. She handed him the phone. Daniel read the article quickly, his brow furrowing slightly. "They caught her," he said. Nia nodded slowly. "And him?" Daniel asked. "He's in a coma," she replied quietly. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. A year earlier, hearing news like this might have shattered her all over again. Marcus had once been the center of her world, the man she believed she would grow old with. But now, standing in the warm sunlight outside the hospital where she had fought for her life, the news felt strangely distant. A few tears slid down her cheeks. Daniel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. Nia nodded softly. "I cried a little," she admitted. "Not because I want him back, but because once upon a time I loved him." Daniel didn't interrupt. After a moment, Nia wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "But that part of my life is over now," she said. She looked around the hospital courtyard, the place where she had slowly learned to live again. Then she turned toward Daniel. "And I'm grateful for where I ended up instead." Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Nia stood in a small garden surrounded by friends, nurses, and former patients who had become part of her support system. Flowers bloomed along the edges of the courtyard, and soft music played in the background as guests chatted happily. At the front of the garden stood Daniel, dressed in a simple suit, smiling warmly as Nia walked toward him. This time, she wasn't wearing a hospital bracelet. She was wearing a wedding dress. The ceremony was small, but filled with genuine love. Many of the nurses who had cared for Nia during her treatment attended, cheering loudly when the couple exchanged vows. When it was time for Daniel to speak, he looked into Nia's eyes and said something that made many people in the audience tear up. "The day I knocked on your door, I thought I was helping a patient," he said. "I didn't realize I was meeting the strongest woman I would ever know." Nia laughed softly through her tears. When they were finally pronounced husband and wife, the applause that filled the garden felt louder than any celebration she had ever experienced before. Nia Carter had once been a woman abandoned by the person she trusted most, left with nothing while fighting a life-threatening illness. But life had written a different ending for her story. She didn't just survive cancer. She survived betrayal, heartbreak, and despair. And in the end, she found something even stronger than the love she once lost. She found a love that stayed. Finally, we have come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, do well to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.